Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I'm so happy to have Tiffany Charkosky with us. And let me tell you a little bit about her. Her work explores human relationships, medicine, and women's health. Her debut memoir, Living Proof: How Love Defied Genetic Legacy, was published in 2025. Her writing has been featured in outlets such as Oprah Daily, Lit Hub, Electric Literature, Gordon Square Review, and Mother Magazine. Tiffany studied English and creative writing at Kenyon College and holds a master's degree in urban planning, design, and development from Cleveland State University. She serves as Director of Arts and Culture at Cleveland Public Library and lives with her family in Northeast Ohio. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you so much for having me, Estelle. I'm a longtime listener and such a huge fan of your show, and I'm just really grateful to get to talk with you today. So thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so glad that we met at the AWP in Baltimore. That's where we first connected. And then I learned about your book. And as soon as I read it, I knew that I wanted to have you come and speak about it in the program. So let's talk about it. First of all, can you give a little synopsis of what Living Proof is about?
Sure. Living Proof is a memoir that explores my journey with genetic testing. It moves forward and backwards in time between me losing my mother as a child and me as a young mother myself discovering the possibility that I had also inherited the hereditary cancer gene that caused her to lose her life when I was 11 years old. And so the book is the exploration of the emotional and physical aftermath of the genetic testing process and my best way of learning how to live with that inherited cancer risk.
And it's so powerful because you use a structure of 2 timelines. And can you talk a little bit about how you worked within that structure and also why you decided to do it that way?
Sure. The structure was something that did not come easy to me. So I'll start by saying that I think a lot of times you have this inclination to tell a story in a straight linear fashion. And for me, I had to really figure out what was the real time timeline in the story, which was the process of discovering that my family had carried this hereditary cancer risk and the genetic testing journey. And then the second timeline was myself as a child. And it took a while for me to figure out how I could show readers why the prospect of testing hit me so hard and sort of what that opened up for me in being a mother and in sort of confronting my mortality and my health in that way. So I landed on the structure of the alternating timelines because I felt it was a way of staying in scene and showing the readers, here's what's happening to me now, but here's why I'm affected by it emotionally in the way that I was. It also was important to me to be able to help readers see what the experience of losing a parent as a child is really like. I feel in a lot of literature, losing a parent is a convenient plot device to move your story along and not actually the inciting incident from which the rest of the story comes from. So it was important for me to try to capture what that was like and what that impact is throughout life.
And it's interesting that you mentioned inciting incident because I had my question for you that in the beginning, you start with, for most of my life, I viewed my mom's death when I was 11 as simply bad luck. Terrible luck, yes, but something I had survived. And then you go into that you got a phone call from your dad that really reveals something that your Uncle Jeff had shared with doctors in medical testing that came out. And that starts you on your journey. And I thought it was a clever way of starting rather than starting with the incident of your mom dying, because I think this really triggered the rest of the search.
Thanks for noticing that. I think for anybody working on a memoir, figuring out exactly how to start the story you're trying to tell in the book that you're writing, for me is one of the hardest pieces of it. But once I cracked that nut, it felt like it became the way to build the rest of the story moving forward.
Were you struggling with other openings? Were you thinking of doing it in different ways and then you decided on this?
My goodness, Estelle, I worked on this book for about 10 years probably, and the number of openings that I tried with it was pretty huge. There was one opening that was really more about the scene of getting my blood drawn and having that moment be a starting point. There were other starting points that really began in childhood. I'm not a famous person, so having, the autobiographical story of Tiffany isn't very interesting to people. So I think with the memoir piece of it, it was trying to figure out how to stay laser focused on the story that I was telling and how to have the events of the story unfold in a way that made you want to keep reading instead of being able to close up the book and put it away for later, which means maybe never picking it back up.
And you've probably heard of this or thought of it earlier on. Anything with the medical diagnosis can come off very heavy because it is heavy. And so, how do you get the reader to almost not shut down and go, oh, this is too much for me? Did you think about that as you were writing?
I did, and I've talked with a couple other writers. Actually, Jackie Gorlick is a woman who you interviewed recently, and she's so wonderful, and her book is beautiful. We talked about how we felt the moving forwards and backwards in time for both of our pieces was actually like an emotional release valve. Like, I'm only going to have you sit with this for a little while because I'm going to take you somewhere else that isn't in that same sort of heavy space. I think when you're writing a book for the first, you're writing your early drafts, it's all about you and kind of dealing with your feelings and processing. And then when it comes time to say, how does this become a book that somebody will hold and read, and what's the reader experience look like? Building in those release points and not having super long chapters and things like that was a way of keeping it so that it didn't get so intense that you didn't want to keep reading.
Did you have a unifying point to each chapter that you wanted to make? How did that work out with the keeping them short?
I ended up writing most of my chapters as a single scene. It didn't end up that way entirely. I think there's a couple chapters where it's a little bit different, but I tried pretty hard for the most part to, especially with the alternating timeline, sort of have here's a scene that's going on in one timeline, and here's the scene coming right after it. So they're kind of automatically playing off of each other. So connecting the scene by their sequence in that way. And I didn't realize when it was on my computer and I was writing it that so many of the chapters ended up being only 2 to 3 pages when they were printed out. I didn't fully understand that that was the length of them until I saw them evolving in book form.
Interesting. And as each, I guess, bit of medical information is revealed, the reader is going along with you and feeling your fear and your trepidation. Did you feel you needed to break that out in different ways every time information was shared, of like either dialogue or a scene or revelation?
I did. And I think that one of the things that's challenging with writing any type of medical book is I am not a doctor. I'm not a geneticist. I think I had this strong feeling going into the project of imposter syndrome to start with, of like, I'm not qualified to write about this. I don't know enough about this stuff at the molecular level to talk about it. But then I pep talked myself and realized most people who go through a significant medical ordeal are regular people who don't know what they're signing up for, and they're learning along the way also. So I think that it ended up being a little bit like a travel log, if you will, of sort of here's my experience. And as I'm processing information and understanding it, the reader was able to do that also. And that was the way that I was able to make what I was going through understandable medically without slowing the story down to have these long segments about what it means to be born with a germline mutation and other medical things that I think you might glaze over if it wasn't something that related to you. So figuring out how to dole that information out like a dog treat, like just enough so you knew what was happening, but not enough to keep you losing interest in the story.
So, as you were writing it, did you cut a lot out?
Oh, yes. This book, it ended up being around 66,000 words. And I want to say that it went to my agent at 66,000 words after many drafts of it by my, like going through it by myself with beta readers and so on. It always stayed about that size. I did 2 rounds of developmental edits before we took it on submission, and cut about a third the first time and added back almost the exact same amount. And then I did the same thing again in the next round. So it was funny how this book wanted to be the size that it is. But every time I pulled things out, I was adding more to make it more about the process of genetic testing, more about that journey, and realized how much you write when you're creating a memoir that feels absolutely necessary to you as a writer. But then to a reader, you're saying, I can have you understand this about me in a way that's more relevant to the story I'm trying to tell. So that revision process was huge. And it was really, a lot of work to make it become something that wasn't scare you off with all of the medical terminology pieces of it.
Right. Because there is a lot of medical terminology and tests and procedures. And you say in the subhead, a genetic legacy. And this really is a legacy book for you because your family and their families, and
Yeah.
as long as the book is in publication, which I hope is forever, we'll be able to read that and read the stories of your mother and Jeff, your uncle, and all the people who have dealt with this in your family. And so, how does that feel to you to have that, hold in your hand?
It feels incredible, a little surreal. I think that when I started working on this project, it was, and you're a writer, so there's ideas that they just don't leave you alone. It's like, I want to tell this story, I need to tell this story. And I really wanted other memoirs when I was going through this process of somebody who'd sort of made it to the other side and could tell me there's hope kind of at the end of this long tunnel that you're on. I think that's what I was looking for. And at the time I was going through my genetic testing process and decision making and all of that, I couldn't find the book that I needed to read. Had been a writer before, but I hadn't taken on something of this scale. I thought, oh my goodness, is this a thing I'm going to have to do? And can I do it? Am I up to the task of doing it? And it really became this incredible way of maintaining a connection with my mother through the writing of this book. She felt so alive to me. I felt so close to her when I was sitting with these memories that I had of her. And My children, of course, never met her. My husband has never met her. And so being able to sort of capture, some of her spirit, but also have that feeling with me was really special. I'm also just overcome by this profound sense of gratitude that hopefully my uncle gave us a gift that will allow this chain to be broken. We still carry the genetic mutation, but we can be proactive in it. And there had been these legacies. My mother died, my uncle died in his 40s. My grandfather died just 1 year before my mom. So he wasn't as young, but he was only in his 50s. He lost his mother when he was a child. And there was this story about her that she was addicted to diet pills, and that's why she died. And I felt this, nobody will know her, but to be able to say, she didn't die of diet pills. She had cancer and nobody would listen to her. And so I feel this sense of being able to shake off these generations of these broken families and a lack of trust in your family unit as a safe place. So it feels really important to me medically to kind of be where I am, but also for my children to know me in this way. And they haven't read the book yet. They're a little afraid of reading it, I think. They're still teenagers. I think they like knowing that the book exists and is there for them when they're ready for it. But when it comes to the legacy piece of it, they won't ever have to wonder, what was my mom like? What did my mom think about these decisions? Or I wonder what my mom would recommend for this. Like, it's all right there, and I stand behind every word of it. So it feels good for me to know that my kids know what went into all of this. Also, that they hopefully don't carry, should they test positive, they don't carry the same baggage. They're not also carrying it like, oh gosh, my mom died. How will I live with this? Instead, I hope it can be any other medical condition that almost everybody is managing something. And so can this just be the thing that they're managing? And it doesn't have to have this traumatic backstory to it.
Yeah, you really did all of that. And you personalized your mother. Like we really see her, how she looked, what she liked to do, her hobbies before she got sick. And you even talk about your own feelings of guilt and mitigated when she wanted a bagel in a certain way. And you have regrets about that. And I thought that was really lovely that you were able to put that on paper and kind of let it go by saying you were sorry at one of your last interactions with her before she died. You also did something very interesting to me. You talked about the effect of your condition on your marriage. And I think that's really interesting. Talk about the choice of including that and also how he felt about it.
I had this feeling when I was going through the process that I had lost some of my worth as a human. And I think that when our bodies betray us, whether you have a physical problem or you can't get pregnant or you have a mental illness or you have trouble breastfeeding, or there's all these ways that I think our bodies and our minds make us feel like there's something wrong with us inside, as at the core of who we are. And I tried to demonstrate through, there's one scene I wrote where I have this terrible fear that my husband has abandoned me at a shopping center and can't shake it. And, it was a technical glitch. His cell phone wasn't working. He found me. He didn't abandon me. But it was that sense that I had become less than as a person, that I was not as worthy somehow of love, of the future I'd been picturing. And so it was important for me to put those scenes in this book because I felt like maybe other people who are going through this could see some part of themselves reflected back in you when they're seeing this. And I think what I was trying to do was show that when we're going through these medical problems, they have an impact on everything around you. They impact your relationships with your family, with your partner, with your children. They shake the core of who you think you are. And my husband has been, my partner through all of this. Like, we are married still. We've been together, we'll be married 20 years this year. And I'm so grateful to him, and he's wonderful. And it was a lot for him. He slept at the hospital with me after I had surgery, and he's the one who had to say, "Hey, I think your hormone levels are kind of off. Do you want to get that tested?" And I think it was important to demonstrate that this wasn't just a thing that happened to me once, it was over, but that it has these ripple effects that kind of impact your sense of who you are, which changes the way that you interact within your relationships. My husband, he's like, "I don't know why you want to write a book about like the worst year of your life, but if you if you want to, I support you doing that." And so he's been really supportive in all of this, and I'm really grateful for him. I felt like that I couldn't say anything about anybody else in my family without being completely honest about the darkest parts of myself in this book too.
And that makes it relatable.
Yeah, it makes me a reliable narrator, I hope.
Yes, and makes you relatable. People are like, okay, that makes sense. So you shared the medical realities of Lynch syndrome, but you also needed to create a narrative that took the reader along, which you did by the dual timelines and the short chapters and going through a journey. Were there other tools you used? Because you use metaphor in here, the rats that come into your house, and you liken that to the proliferation of cancer cells. What other kind of tactics did you use?
I think that I'm a writer who thinks a lot about images and metaphors a ton. I live in Northeast Ohio, and Lake Erie, which is one of the Great Lakes, is like right outside, where I live. I live in a city that borders the lake. I can see it from my office. I don't have a lakefront window, but I can see it from where I work. It's amazing because I feel like my mother's death being this natural disaster, that it was like part of the natural world. Without medical intervention, it felt I would be part of that natural world. The natural order was without intervention, something would happen to you. And so I often thought about her sickness as this natural disaster and having survived and kind of rebuilding after a natural disaster. So I think there's a lot of metaphors in there where I use the lake as it sort of mirrors like my emotional state. So I do feel like I think a lot in metaphor, and I'm like that in regular life too. I'm always, oh, it's kind of like this, or, analogies and metaphors. I think that's just the way that I think. So definitely thought a lot about that. I really wanted to have good dialogue scenes in this. I tried as hard as I could, and this is the thing with, writing scenes in metaphor. There's a scene where my sister and I are out to lunch, and she sort of has one opinion about genetic testing and I have a different opinion. And instead of saying, I felt like my sister and I were standing at different ends of this spectrum, I put us in, I could try to go back to that lunch that we had and remember as much of that conversation as I could. So for me, dialogue was a big part of showing how other people were responding to me. And that gave me the mirror by which to say, Brittany is saying this, but I'm feeling this. And so I think that as a tool was really important. The 3-act structure, the book is in 3 parts. There's part 1 moves forward and backwards in time. Parts 2 and 3 were just full steam ahead. I found out my positive genetic mutation, and then everything from that point forward was in the moment. It was moving forward, it was forward facing. So I think that when creating this book, there were all of these craft devices that you think about, how do I employ these best to tell the story that I'm trying to tell here?
Yeah, and you did use it. And I'd love if you could read a section.
Sure, I would love to. You're asking me to read a passage from a scene called Family Tree, which is one of my longest scenes in the whole book. And this was the scene in which I met for the first time with my geneticist and my genetic counselor. And in this scene, they ask you to draw your family tree. You are naming the members of your family, and they look at who you're genetically related to. And this scene did a lot of heavy lifting for me, and it took me a while to figure out how I could talk about these members of my family in a way that was in scene, was keeping the story moving forward. And so the part of this is when we get to my son's name on the family tree. So this is the end of that chapter. 16 years after losing my mom, I became one. When I was in labor, my mother in law, Susie, wiped my face with a cool rag and kept Brian grounded so he could hold one of my legs each time I pushed. Brittany was there too, offering sips of water between contractions. Before going into labor, I had imagined only Brian and the doctor present when our son was born. But after 16 hours of labor, when it came time to push, I begged Susie and Brittany to stay. I never registered how much my mom loved me or how much my grandmother loved her until I pulled my slimy newborn onto my chest. Waves of love and fear washed over me, unlocking a universe I hadn't known existed. In that moment, I understood these women in a way I never had before, as though time's long arms were welcoming me across an invisible threshold. In caring for newborn Ben, I learned that love isn't just an emotion, but a verb, a series of actions repeated day after day. His needs were as constant as the tides. At first, love felt like a primal instinct, a ferocious drive to keep him safe, connecting me more to the animal world than to the moms I met at the breastfeeding clinic I visited. Over time, though, emotions unfolded within my heart for this beautiful, perfect, helpless creature Brian and I had created. We called him the Brad Pitt of babies, amazed we'd made something so wonderful. Mothering Ben also connected me across time with my mom. I imagined her learning to love me, a puny pink blob with orange fuzz on my head. I pictured her pacing the rooms in our duplex or passing me off to my dad for a nap. Somewhere within the maze of diapers, feeding, learning to use a breast pump, getting an IUD placed, and sunrise walks with a stroller and our dog, I finally felt how much she must have loved me. Until I had Ben, I hadn't understood how hard it must have been for her to stop being the kind of mother she wanted to be. Facing the reality of this mutation was another practical act of maternal love. Before I sat down to work on this dreaded family tree, I saw my mom's death in terms of what we lost. Me, Danny, Brittany, our dad, our grandma, her siblings, her friends. But as I traced the lines connecting her to me and me to Ben and the unborn baby inside me, I began to understand the depths of what she had lost. I felt the fear, sadness, and guilt that must have consumed her as she contemplated all she would soon leave behind. Sitting in this orderly room with two strangers, I felt an unknowable anger begin to clench its invisible claws. For the first time, I understood how far beyond her control it had all been.
So beautiful, Tiffany. I asked you to read that passage because it encompasses so much of what the book is about. You've referred to it as a love letter, and it shows the love, it shows the moving on, the legacy part of it, your emotions, your childhood loss, and what I think is so important there is a realization at the end of it. You are in a different place emotionally when you come out of that experience of revealing what you felt about it's not just about you who lost, it's what your mom. And I think it's the first time in the book that you ever looked at it in that way. It's sort of like the older, wiser narrator makes an appearance. Can you talk about the choices? Because as writers, we're always making choices. And because that was one of your longest chapters, it really had to end with a powerful punch, which it does.
It's funny when you're writing a book, you think, what is this thing doing? The whole time you're saying, what is the work that this chapter is doing? Like, what am I trying to get across here? And going to meet my geneticist and my genetic counselor was so scary to me. And I live in Cleveland, and I grew up in Cleveland, and my genetic testing was actually done, or my counseling was done in the same building at the hospital that my mom was treated in. So the scene starts with me showing up, realizing I'm at this building that I actually knew from my childhood. And in earlier versions of the book, there are longer chapters about my brother, about my sister, about my uncle, about my grandfather. And what I realized was I love all those memories about them, but they took the reading experience away from the genetic testing process. And so I think I did a lot of cutting actually in that, even in what you read, I whittled some things out of there for sure. But it was important because I lost my mom and I carried a set of beliefs around her, and that made me who I was. And I would not wish this medical journey on anybody, except that I think it made me such a better human for having gone through it. It gave me this empathy for my mother that I didn't know I didn't have for her, if that makes sense. It allowed me to see her in a different way. It gave me the chance to think about my father in a different way, to really see what he had gone through, and how watching what my husband was balancing with me gave me a window into my father. And so I felt really demonstrating, confronting the mutation and meeting with the geneticists and the genetic counselor and really doing the work of that process was a way of moving beyond the belief system that I had been living in. So it was a lot to write. And I still read passages like that. I had to like blink a couple times reading it to you because it still moves me. It still lives so close to the surface of who I am. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's so beautifully put on paper. And it really shows. I mean, we're dealing with medical issue, but your prose is so lovely that it catapults the reader into your world in a very visceral way.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I wanted to ask you, a lot of times people will write a book about eating disorders, mental health issues. And the next step is they're going to become an advocate. They become involved with an organization, they become spokespeople. Is that any part of your trajectory that you're interested in?
It's really interesting that you asked me that question because I feel like that's something I kind of grapple with in real time. So I have a background in the arts. I worked in the nonprofit art world for a very long time. I love experiencing music and the visual arts and the literary arts. And so I think that there's this interesting crossroads for me where I look at the creation, like to take the time to write this book and say, wait, I'm actually going to move my own creative vision forward in this instead of being, on the arts administration and commissioning side of things. At the same time, there's these amazing organizations that I've had the chance to interact with that are doing tons of advocacy work. And I feel like there's this push and pull for me between really diving further into the advocacy side of this work and putting myself out there more as a face of what hereditary cancers can look like. And at the same time, that's a very emotionally intense place to live. And I'm also a really creative and imaginative person, separate from this diagnosis. And I love writing essays, and I've been working on a novel. And, so I'm trying to, I think, figure out where do I fit in this sort of realm of creative person and writer, certainly wanting to write more, certainly wanting to find other readers. I would love to get this book in, the hands of genetic counselors and people who are facing these decisions that they need to make regarding their own health. And so I've been building up my networks in both sides of things, trying to, engage with the amazing people who are kind of trying to do the advocacy work, but also I love the creative side of things. And I feel I would be really disappointed to not keep being creative and imaginative and writing about other things also. So,
As your whole book is, it's a very honest and forthright answer. And I completely am interested in seeing a novel from you because you have such a way with scene and dialogue and words. And it's just been such a pleasure to have you on the program. Everyone, living proof. Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.